Welcome back to SuperAthlete Radio, episode 3. Very excited. If you have not yet downloaded episode 1 or 2, you can find it at where all podcasts can be downloaded. Miss Nikki Ann, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well.
Mr. Chase Jackson.
I'm doing fantastic.
CEO of SuperAthlete.
That's right. Never been better.
Never been better. All right.
Anything new for you since we last were live, or any thoughts from podcast episode 1 and 2?
No thoughts. No thoughts in particular. I think it was really fun. But I'm excited to hear more about kind of super athletes, that you've encountered, whether through your exchanges or through reading or through just kind of information.
Yes.
Big brain.
Yeah, so just provide context on that. We have some very exciting guests coming up that fall into that realm. Before we go there with this episode today, I thought it'd be really good and interesting and entertaining to go over the story of Rickson Gracie, specifically from his biography that came out last year. Are you familiar with Mr. Gracie at all?
No, who is that? It's like Renzo Gracie?
Renzo Gracie is probably his one.
Like the fighter?
Yes.
Okay.
So Rickson's considered probably the best of the best out of all the Gracies. And the reason that I think it's so interesting based on what we talked about before and kind of what the theme of this show is how the Gracies kind of came to be in terms of how they brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to the world, and then how many of them have become so successful, and how it's become such a amazing, powerful, effective fighting form that was brought to the world. So,
speaking of, you've actually had your hand in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yes.
Tell me about that experience. Like, how does it feel compared to other sports you've done?
It's very cognitive, and it's very technical. So I've done it in the past. I'm definitely not. There's deep levels to jiu-jitsu, so I'm not very far along. But background, I've done a lot more Muay Thai and striking than jiu-jitsu. Doing more jiu-jitsu lately because I'm a big believer in the school that I'm going to and the leader there. But it's very cognitive, so it's very taxing on the mind. But it's also it's very good, I think.
What about it is cognitive?
It's just there's so many techniques and movements and then counter movements that it can be overwhelming.
Because all of those are like at your disposal. So it's knowing when to strike at this time or when to counter and what counter to use and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's so many levels to it. But I think like on a bigger principle, I think that it's just a benefit of jiu-jitsu is that it helps control the ego, because everyone, I think, would benefit from getting choked out a little bit once in a while.
Yes.
Yeah. So before we get started here, this whole Gracie clan, as they called it, it stems from two brothers. One of them, which was Rickson's dad, Carlos and Helio, and they kind of had this vision of what they wanted to create with their kids. And we spoke about this a little bit last time, but what do you feel about having that vision compared to kind of just letting your kids do whatever? That was not the case here in the Gracies. It was the complete opposite. It was like, you're a Gracie, so this is what you do. Do you have any thoughts on how to go about that? Do you feel like it's better to let the young athlete or the young person kind of find their way, or do you feel like it's more beneficial to put them in what the family knows?
I'm gonna say that it's much more beneficial to put them into what the family knows, just because they have guides in that area. Because you don't want to be a jack of all trades. You want to be, a master of none. You want to be a master. You want to enjoy it, and you're gonna enjoy it because it's like, okay, you have a family legacy in this. it's useful in life, how to defend yourself.
Mm.
And, you know, even if it's not that, what if it's like gymnastics or tennis playing family? It's important to know that there's a mission above you, that it's bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, it makes a family tighter to know that they're all working towards that.
Yeah.
Versus if, you know, you just have kind of interest here and there. It's great because you get exposure to a lot of things, and then maybe you end up sticking with something.
Mm-hmm.
But, you kind of just end up in the air fluttering.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
I agree 100%. And I really like the idea of that there's something for this is what we do and this is who we are. So I'm going to start by reading a quote on how this started.
Story time.
Story time.
Ah.
This is from Hicks and Gracie's biography. Breathe. After the two loves of his life died, Carlos Gracie decided to father as many children, preferably boys, as possible, and he encouraged my father to do the same. Their goal was to create a clan of fighters. Between 1932 and 1967, Carlos and Helio fathered 30 children with 8 different women. 21 of them were boys. When Margarita, my father's first wife, the woman I consider my mother, was unable to get pregnant, my uncle came up with a plan. My father, with my mother's knowledge and consent, would impregnate our African Brazilian babysitter, Belinda, who gave birth to me and my older brothers, Rorian and Relson. The whole thing was an elaborate ruse. Margarita wore a fake belly during Belinda's pregnancies, and when the time came for her to give birth, she went to the hospital and came home with a baby. Not even her best friends knew. When I was young and looked at myself in the mirror and saw my freckles, I thought they were from my Scottish blood. Little did I know that I was half African Brazilian. So this was the root of how the Gracies got started. And as you can see, the role of the women in that was they had a very specific role.
Yeah, the one question that like comes up in my head is, these aren't your kids, but, and like they were notorious for not treating women that well, the women in their lives at least. Why would you stay?
Maybe these two were very persuasive in communicating the mission.
What? It's just, it blows my mind because I think the modern day women would not do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It even makes me think of like Bob Marley, like his first like wife, the woman he was in love with when he became famous. You know, he was cheating on her and all this stuff. But when they interviewed her and they asked like, "Why did you stay?" She said like, "I knew the mission and I knew that it was much bigger than Bob and it was bigger than than her." So she was just along for the ride to really be a support. But they were still love there. You know, they were best friends. It's crazy. Maybe she really knew the mission. She was like, I'm down for these athletes.
Yeah, I think it is. She was down, and I think these two were very persuasive in communicating what the goal was. And again, it turned out well in terms of what they were trying to do. Do you think that could be done in 2023?
I feel like if it could be, that the woman should be entitled to some sort of financial compensation.
Yeah.
There's going to be a commercial somewhere floating around. Yes.
And it makes me think of we talked about this before, but the chess players.
Yeah.
The Polgars. I think it was Polgar. But it was this gentleman.
Rhonda. We spoke about her.
Yeah?
Yes.
And it was this gentleman who had decided to create chess masters. He didn't even have a background in chess. And he decided to create chess masters before his kids were even born and dedicate their lives to it. And
the guy with the 3 daughters.
Yeah.
And he spoke about, so that's not Rhonda. That's something different.
Yeah, this is Folger.
Folger, okay.
Yeah, but you don't hear the story about the mom in that one very much either. But she, I think, potentially had to have been very much involved.
Yeah, in terms of making the house, you know, feeding them and all that stuff. He's kind of there for, like, the mission. Like, I'm going to make you a success. I think, it's a balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what did he say? He said something about like he had a theory about like age 5.
Folger
Yeah.
theory
Mm-hmm.
in about age 5. Elaborate a little bit.
Like you want to keep them, I think, going until like age 5, like just kind of like lock them in, like
Mm-hmm.
you know.
So very similar to this.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Well, I'm kind of butchering his theory, but I'm sure we'll insert it somewhere here.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the earlier the better with a kid.
Yeah.
You get them fucking hellbent early enough,
Mm-hmm.
like, and that's all they know.
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
Super athlete / super chess players are created.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think it's great. I really like the idea of having a mission. And I really like the idea of, I don't know, I just find that stuff entertaining. I think
It's
it's
entertaining?
fun. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
you get a group of people in a room, and then this person does this, and this person does that, and then, oh, yeah, that's Folger over there.
Mm-hmm.
And he has his 7-year-old daughter and his 5-year-old daughter play chess 12 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
I think the world needs more of that.
Yeah.
And it turned out very well for the daughters. I think they all were very successful in chess, and that leads to life opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. Even like when I was talking to you earlier before the show about my parents
Mm.
who like never went on dates, like they just work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm wondering, like, how did you stay together that long,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you never got on a date, you never had fun, you know, it's always been kind of scandals and work.
Yeah.
But it's because they had a mission.
Mm.
And I think that kind of battle buddy concept keeps you going in a lot of situations.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back to the book. So we talked in episode 1 about controlling your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that the Gracies taught all the Gracie kids. It was like a foundational principle.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad was able to lift the victim out of the water so the crew could drag him into their boat. By now it was getting dark, and one of the lifeboat crew members began to panic and said, "We're not going to make it back to the ship." Before the panic could spread, my father took the man's oar and said, "Come on, guys, let's get back to the ship." This decisiveness and confidence settled the crew. By the time they made it back, conditions were so bad that it took an almost hour to hoist the lifeboat back on deck. If my father had not imposed his strong and confident mindset on the lifeboat crew, the panic would have spread like wildfire. Emotions are contagious. Helio, who was Hickson's dad, used to say that you had to break the emotional wave before it broke on you. Take a car salesman, for example. When you walk into the lot, he intercepts you and comes with a pitch. You can drive off this lot in this new car today, no money down. Of course, you want a new car, and naturally you don't want to put any money down, but if you let the salesman gain momentum, he'll get you to agree to anything he wants. You can't allow yourself to be swept away by a wave without knowing where it's going to take you. Instead, when the salesman approaches, you say, "No, thank you," which breaks his momentum. Now he has to regroup. So this idea of controlling your emotions, which I think play a huge factor in sports, in business, and in life. Do you have anything that comes
Can
to
you summarize what he's talking about with the salesman?
What the car salesman is trying to do is he's trying to implant into the prospect's head of you came here to buy a car, and because you came here to buy a car, there's a couple things he's doing there. One, he's getting him to say yes, to already put that minor commitment in his mind that, okay, I came here to buy a car, so I need to walk out here with a car. We talked about this in episode 1 in terms of once you make a plan or a decision to do something, and then you go far along, and then even even if it pivots away, that because you've already had this plan or this idea, then you're going to stick with it, even though it might not be to your benefit. And the car, so that's one thing he's doing, is there. And then 2, he's kind of trying to gain power and status in the situation by saying, "Hey, let me lead you, let me be your guide. You don't know what you're doing here, and I can, here to support you. So what the story is there is he's taking it's taking the power back while keeping his emotions under control.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, in terms of business performance and kind of your day-to-day, what do you do? You're very good at controlling your emotions. How do you go about doing that?
That's a great question. I'm going to turn it back to you because you run a huge ship with people, and you're letting people go, you're bringing people back, and you have to have tough conversations,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be with your own children, with your partners, with people who are in the business.
Mm-hmm.
How do you maintain?
I think it's a very valuable skill that I wish it was taught to us much earlier. And a couple of the tools that I use to contain my emotions are, one is to understand that just because you have an emotion doesn't mean that it's working for you.
Yeah.
Two, understand that a lot of times an initial reaction, an emotional reaction is not the same, is not going to be this, provide the same thing as logic.
Mm-hmm.
So an emotional response to something is usually not going to be the same as a logical response. And in most cases, I think you want to use logic to make the right decision. And three, another tool I use to keep my emotions under control is to understand that the ego plays a big factor. And
Especially for men.
Especially for men.
Yeah.
The ego plays a big factor, and it's I don't want to use the word battle, but it's something where you really want to focus on controlling that, because if you let your emotions control you, then you're really kind of like a robot, because you're not in control of yourself. You're not in control of your actions.
Yeah.
You asked me last night, did I have anger issues when I was younger?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I did a little bit. And part of that, once I realized that I really wanted to conquer that issue with me, was because if you have an anger problem, then you really are not in control of your life.
Yeah.
Because whatever you encounter that gets you angry, then, you don't know how you're going to respond. So I like a certain level of control with that. And then to bring it back to like sports and performance, then Hickson talks about this a lot in here, is when you're competing against somebody, that's a lot of what psychological warfare is, right? Is to get into your head.
You're really good at that.
Yeah.
When you compete, you're fire.
Yeah. Well, it's fun.
Psychotic.
Yeah. It's fun. And then also, but for me, it's like a game, because can you take control of your mind, and can you take control of the situation? Can you be able to step back to see what's really going on, rather than being kind of in the fire, in the midst of it? Mm-hmm. And I think so much of life.
You rather just set the fire and
yeah,
and then walk away.
Yeah. Well, it's very funny to see how people respond.
Mm-hmm.
The NBA playoffs are going on right now, and the Miami Heat, had like one of the worst records when they come into the playoffs. They made the playoffs, but they had one of the worst records in there, and they beat one of the best teams in the league. And they have this guy named Jimmy Butler, who's so much of his game is psychological warfare, and you can just see just the power in that, because it adds going back to this idea of how much emotions are involved in everything. It plays a huge factor, and they won, and he's very good at that, and people can't deal with it.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a way to replicate that. There's got to be a book somewhere on that.
On what?
Psychological warfare. What to say, what ticks people off, how to inspire, because you can use that same method to inspire, a team, whether it's athletes or employees or,
Mm-hmm.
Yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just pushing the right buttons.
Right.
Yeah. And you even one thing I want to touch on is when you talk about anger, when I've spoken to you before, you mentioned it as energy. Or something along that line of, what did you call it? Like an excess of energy, or like
Energy leak.
an energy leak. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that. And, it's just about you figured out a way to kind of channel it.
Mm-hmm.
And use what we call anger, which is just a type of energy,
Mm-hmm.
and use that into sports, use that into business, use that into the right avenues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tim Grover talks about that a lot. The mental toughness coach, who is the performance coach for Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, where he's a big believer on separating yourself from your emotions. But the one emotion he said that could potentially be to your benefit is anger.
Oh yeah, completely.
But you have to be able to channel it.
Yes.
And I don't think it can be the only source of motivation. Potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael Jordan was a great example of someone who he was. I try to explain this to my boys, but the most inspiring thing about Michael Jordan was not how high he could jump. It's how relentless he was in terms of showing up every day, in practicing, and in competing. And he just played at a higher energy than everyone else, like maybe of all time. So it's like, how do you do that? And what he did is he would find these different slides, no matter how small, and he would create these elaborate stories in his head. And
to make himself angry.
yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't even anger, but it would be just whatever it took for him to have this higher level of energy than everyone else. Which it was a consistent theme in his career, is how was he able to do this? Because he would play harder than everybody, and then at night he would compete cards. Cards was his thing, so he would go hard in cards or whatever else. And then he would do golf during the day before basketball, and the same thing, where it was just like this relentless thirst for competition. So I think anger can be used.
Yeah. It's so funny because that actually worked against him. His version of psychological warfare. So I remember there was a game between him and Kobe, and he told Kobe you can wear the shoes, but you never feel them. Do you remember that? And it fucking set something off in Kobe, and he fucking went crazy on him. And I think Jordan lost that following game. So.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because you asked the question of, can this be built? Is there a book on something like that? And you don't know Kobe personally. I didn't know Kobe personally.
Yeah.
But he was very diligent in trying to replicate everything about Michael Jordan.
Right.
And he did a pretty good job of replicating that mindset in terms of bringing that extra level of energy and bringing that anger.
If anybody knows a book on psychological warfare, comments.
Comment below.
Yeah. Okay.
And then going back to this book with Breathe and Hickson Gracie, is he was a believer in being able to completely separate. So one of the things I look at when you look at someone like Hickson Gracie is, how is he able to be kind of like one of one, like best of best? And he had this combination of physical, mental, and spiritual development that he consistently cultivated. And he was a big believer in being able to completely detach from all emotions, because he thought of it as wasted energy, which he would look for triggers in his opponent where they would get either mentally, they would get emotional and they would get anger, and he would look at that as weakness that he could attack, or he would be so detached. Hickson Gracie had amazing ability to keep his heart rate low, and in doing that, he could override his opponents physically, So he had all these different avenues that he would use. Let me elaborate. Instead, override them physically, he would understand that if he put pressure on them for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, his opponents, at some point, they would redline, and he would still be down here. So he would have that as an opportunity to win. He would also have the opportunity of, okay, we're going to look for the ways to get this guy emotional, and we're going to find that as a weakness and attack there. So he was always looking for these different ways, physically, spiritually, or mentally, to attack.
Yeah, he's spiritually attacking people. That's crazy. That's demonic.
Yeah. What do you feel like spiritually? Where do you feel like that fits with mission and performance and mindset? Do you feel like that's an important piece?
Oh, I thought you were talking about like spiritually attacking people. Like, no, that's witchcraft.
Yeah.
No, but you're saying like being spiritual.
Yeah.
Like,
do you feel like that can be a benefit?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, who was it? There was 2 UFC fighters. I have the clip put up, but you know how like before matches, like to kind of sell the fight, they'll like talk shit to each other and stuff like that.
Yes.
These guys were talking about
Huge example of psychological warfare, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
To kind of like amp it up, and one guy was talking about how he uses demons to, to fight, or ancestral spirits to fight, and the other guy is, I use Jesus Christ. So even whatever your beliefs are in kind of religion or spirituality, I think knowing that there's something bigger surrounding you helps you a lot. And, meditation and all that stuff, it's really important. But both of these guys are really using, like, what they believe in spiritually to fight each other. But regardless, I think it's important. It's important to like know that there's something helping you.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge deal in terms of simplifying and making your life, because there's so many decisions that we have to make throughout the day, and I think decision making is such a huge piece of performance in sports and in business, and it's an underrated piece. But it's like how can you we can only have so much brain power, right? So how can we make it where there's less decisions that we need to make in the day? And I think having a mission, being connected with source, or being connected with something that you don't have to think about what your values are or how you go about or what, I think is a huge deal in terms of being advantageous to simplifying your plan and your mission and your progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you want to talk about throwing babies?
Yeah, let's throw some babies. Find one.
Okay. Babies to throw. This is one of the tools that the Gracies used to develop.
What is it supposed to do with the baby?
We're going to find out right now.
It's going to make it stronger?
From the book. My brothers, my cousins, and I wanted to follow in Helio and Carlson's footsteps and carry our family's flag into battle. My father and uncle attempted to instill us with courage even as babies. One Gracie family tradition was to throw male babies into the air before their first birthday to build confidence and trust between father and son. The process is gradual. You start by just bouncing the baby in your hands. If he laughs, you bounce him a little higher. Next, you throw the baby a few inches in the air and let him fall back into your hands. Next, you throw him a foot in the air and then another foot. My dad and uncle were able to play catch with some babies like me and my brother Rolls. Not every Gracie baby rose to this challenge, and I believe they used this as a test to determine which of us would become game fighters. Nice crawl, walk, run approach.
Game fighters.
Well, that's the whole thing here, right? Is they have this mission, and it's what makes the best fighters in the world. It's the technique, and then it's the psychological piece. And they're talking a little bit about here is nature versus nurture, is how much is inborn and how much is nurtured. And what this was a representation of throwing, they got some great pictures in here of the way of them really looking like they're chucking babies like a football to each other. It's fantastic.
Like they take the baby and like we're gonna have to display that somewhere.
Yeah, I think we should because it's an amazing, awesome image. But what their theory was is that some of their boys, of all these boys that they were producing from all these different women, some of them would be game ready, born with it, and then others would not have it. So their theory was they would throw them in the air, and some would respond well, and those that responded well, they kept pushing, and they would get more attention than the boys who would, start, or the babies, really, who would start crying. They would get less attention.
That's interesting.
So the question is it nature or nurture when it comes to competitiveness and the psychological piece to becoming a peak performer in athletics?
I think it's, I'm going to say nature. I'm going to say nature for sure. It depends on, like, your parents. It depends on, just, I think some kids are just inbred with that kind of mindset. That doesn't mean it can't be learned. You can learn to be competitive. It just is your own kind of psychological warfare as the parent using, psychology to see what makes a kid tick, to get them to do what needs to be done. Yeah, so.
I agree 100%. I think it's definitely nature. Because even the counter against that, the common argument would be the nurture of, like, things that impacted you when you're a child in your environment, or trauma or things like that. But I think your personality type kind of dictates a lot of how you respond to that. Do you respond to that where it pushes you forward, or do you respond to that where
it sets you back?
Yeah. So maybe these Hickson called us dad and uncle dinosaurs in the end in terms of their mentality, but they might have been
onto something.
Might have been onto something on this.
Chucking babies.
Chucking babies.
Crazy.
In terms of that. So they had the physical piece, the mental piece. Diet was a huge thing for them. The Gracie Diet.
Yeah, they didn't eat candy.
No candy.
They called it poison.
Called it poison.
What
Very
else?
little meat.
Really? They're like, okay.
I think they were big on the alkaline as well. If I remember correctly. How's that working for you?
It's not.
Yeah? What does that mean?
I mean, because I've eaten shrimp. Like,
yeah.
I ate shrimp the other day. So.
Shrimp is acidic.
Yeah, you're not supposed to eat any meat at all.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's really about you. And, like, I'm good with the vegetables, like not eating certain vegetables and then eating the right vegetables and stuff like that. But that's a discipline thing. You got to really, set a time limit on that.
Yeah. And with nutrition being such a huge part of SuperAthlete, I think that's the big thing, is figuring out what works for you. And then...
Because naturally, I don't eat, like, a lot of meat. I don't really like meat.
And naturally, I've been more...
You like meat.
I enjoy meat.
Yeah.
It gives me energy, certain meat. But I think that's the big thing, that with the nutrition game, that people are much better at now, but we're all different. So why don't they teach that in school? But to have this kind of certain level of awareness in triggering what foods work for you and what foods...
Yeah, because that food pyramid stuff that they were teaching in school is total bullshit.
Yeah.
That shit crazy.
Yeah, that's a very interesting...
I'm thinking of getting a glucose machine, like here, to know, like, what foods are, like, setting off, glucose and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic idea. And you can get some very good knowledge very quickly, and probably with some surprising things in there as well. But so there's the physical training piece. They were relentless in terms of... they have a section here in the book where they talk about steel sharpens steel.
That's true.
In what way?
Iron sharpens iron.
Iron sharpens iron?
Yeah. It's proximity.
Mm-hmm.
It matters.
Yeah. And it's the whole premise of the chapter is that this small section in Brazil produced all these amazing fighters, not just from the Gracie camp, but from other camps in the area. And these guys would literally fight in the street, and the only rules would be, this is one-on-one. Like, we're fighting for, there's no, you're not going to come in with a gun, have one of your guys come in with a gun with you if you lose, or no one's getting jumped. So they really did kind of create this iron sharpens iron mentality. And it's, how can we create more of that in the world? That's what I want to know.
That was a really good question.
And what needs to happen to create that culture?
I think it starts with you. And who you place yourself around.
Okay.
Because it's really hard to like influence other people when they're so deep in shit. And they want to be so deep in bullshit. It's easier for them to bring you down. So I think it starts with you and you changing the people that you're around. So change your friend groups, change the information that you're taking in. If a friend is slipping, because this is now your community that you're building, correct that. Be a leader. And then from there, kind of builds and builds and builds.
Yeah, we talk about the importance of high standards all the time.
And then doing it over and over. Like, so you want to see those friends as often as possible. You want to be around those family members as often as possible. You want to be around your kids and influence them as often as possible.
Yeah, Angela Duckworth, who is a researcher who wrote this book, Grit, she found that the number one, if you want someone to be more gritty, Gritty, you put them in a culture like that.
What's the culture?
A more gritty culture. It's.
How do you define gritty? Right.
You define gritty how do you define grit? It's like a combination, I think, of like mental toughness and persistence and growth mindset.
Okay, gotcha.
And the most effective way research has found to be able to get more grit is to get into a culture like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then why is it such a big fight? Why is that so rare, I guess, is my question, in the world today?
Because society has pushed so much nonsense on us. I mean, there's a lot of good information out there where you can build that kind of culture. But, again, people like to be, it sounds crazy, but people like to be stuck in shit. Because it's easy.
Right.
It's easy. It's easy to drink alcohol. It's easy to eat terrible foods. It's, our body wants that stuff. It doesn't, it shouldn't have it. Yeah, and it's constantly pushed to us every day. Every day. Yeah.
And the brain's wired for that. The brain's wired to want that.
Yeah, because it's less work. And the brain doesn't want to work. It's working to keep you alive. So it's it doesn't want to have to think.
It just wants to survive.
Yeah.
So why do humans do all the things that we do?
What do you mean?
We talked about this before.
Why do we even walk?
Why get out of bed in the morning if we're just going to end up back there at the end of the day? Which I think goes back to this idea of having a mission and having a idea of being connected with something bigger. Because it makes life much more, I think, manageable to have those things. And it also...
Yes.
When you have these foundational values, or you have these... I don't know what the Gracies would... rules, or whatever it was, whether it was diet, or whether it was how you went about your business, or how you checked your emotions. These override the brain's desire for comfort.
Yeah, comfort. That's the word I was looking for.
Mm-hmm. And people, I'm a big believer in growth, and that's a huge piece of my life, and that's a huge belief, a huge piece of the companies. It's a huge belief of what we really try and inspire and encourage and teach our customers and those that come in the programs that we create, because I feel like the feelings that you get from comfort, while maybe satisfactory, it's not even close to how you feel after you do something that you didn't want to do. Mm-hmm. In terms of fighting through that discomfort and not being a robot and not being a slave to your own brain.
Mm-hmm. So how do you get past discomfort?
How do you get past discomfort?
Yeah.
In what aspect?
You know, it's daunting to like do the things, even if it takes like 5 minutes to do that one thing. It's like, oh, I gotta do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, like how do you view discomfort?
I really like the idea of having the mission.
Okay.
Because then that takes away the decision, takes away...
Because you know you have to do that because of this mission.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things that Hickson talks about is that before every fight, he would understand, he would get himself mentally to a place where he would be at peace if he died while fighting. So he never tapped. He wouldn't tap. You could break his arm or you'd put him to sleep, but he wouldn't tap. But that sounds very good. But when you actually think about actually being in that position, that's about as uncomfortable as it can get. Mm-hmm. And he was able to do that. He was able to separate himself from some of the best fighters in the world by having that mission ahead of time and letting that override the feelings of discomfort. Mm-hmm. So from like a neuroscience perspective, what brain doctors would say, I'm not a brain doctor, is that if you kind of program your brain ahead of time to
think of the worst possible scenario.
Yes.
In Stoicism, they talk about that too.
Yeah, and then how are you gonna respond to it? Mm. In the worst possible, if this happens, then I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to do what? And you can apply that to anything. Mm-hmm. So, like in terms of your diet, if I get a craving for cheeseburgers or whatever, love for the cheeseburgers, then I want to do this instead, right? Or if I say I'm going to wake up at this time of day, if I say I'm going to wake up early on, if I say I want to wake up at 5 a.m., then when 5 a.m. happens, I'm going to do this. And if my brain says, oh, you want to stay in bed, then I'm going to do this instead, then our brain is, in that case, it can become very systematic in terms of you can program it, which I think is one of the fun parts in life, is to be able to...
I'm starting a new experiment. Let me know what you think about this. Okay, so here's the experiment. To wake up early, I am going to give myself the most terrible thing that I want, right? Because like the body wants like comfort. It wants to scroll on TikTok.
Okay.
So I'm going to wake up 5 a.m. and scroll on TikTok for, let's say, 30 minutes, right?
That's a powerful way to start your day.
It's powerful. Fuck.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It sounds counterintuitive, but...
Sounds very counterintuitive.
Yes. But, like, that's the thing. It gets you up because I know I can scroll on TikTok. That's the only time of the day that I can scroll on TikTok at 5 a.m. and then get on with whatever task that I was supposed to be doing. Or wake up 5 a.m. and then jump on the most important task. But that task has to be predetermined. Yeah.
Yeah, so every single productivity person on the planet would say that second idea was a little better. But
sometimes, what if it's like Saturday and you just want to condition yourself to wake up at 5 a.m. every day?
then I think that's inspiring. Run the experiment.
You know where I heard this experiment?
Yeah, TikTok.
Yes. Yes. I don't know. If anyone tries it, let me know how it goes.
So this is just, you're not going to do it?
No, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it for 1 week, and on the next one, I'll let you know how it's working out. Well, you'll know. But
And are you going to have like a specific scrolling room that you're going to go to when you get out of bed?
I'm going to go in the closet, and I'm going to scroll in there. No. Actually, I'm going to walk
Okay.
and scroll. So that way I do my 20 minutes walking, but I can scroll on TikTok.
Yeah. And what about paying attention to your environment and surroundings and what's going on around you? Or you feel like you got a certain level where you can scroll and walk.
People do that all the time.
Yeah, but do they have the level of awareness?
Yeah. I'm a woman. I'm designed for web thinking. Yes.
Well, I'm excited to see how this experiment goes.
Yes.
And I am a big believer in running as many different experiments as possible.
Yeah. I mean, what do you do to wake up early? Or to, like, build a habit? Or to, like...
I'm a big believer a great day starts the night before. And that means setting up protocols the night before to make it easier on yourself to wake up earlier.
What's a protocol?
A system that works well for me would be to minimize screens the last couple hours before bed. It would be to minimize work stuff a couple hours before bed.
Mm-hmm.
It would be to change my body temperature before bed, to like have a ritual to prepare for sleep, and then that makes it much easier to wake up in the morning, because it doesn't need to be a fight. Like, that's the whole, everyone has this concept of, oh, I gotta wake up early, which one you don't, right? Just gotta figure out what works well for you.
Mm-hmm.
But two, also,
Yeah, because some of the most successful people in the world are waking up 10 a.m. It's just, how are they utilizing their time?
100%.
You know?
Right. It's kind of force fed to wake up early, but
What are you doing with that time?
What are you doing at that time? Are you scrolling on TikTok? Or are you doing your most important task?
We'll find out. We will find out.
Yeah. And it just goes back to this idea of having this level of awareness, of knowing what nutrition works for you, knowing your body clock, knowing what story you want to kind of create and live in your life. Like, what do you want to create? How you want to spend your time?
Yeah. Do you believe in chronotypes?
I do believe in chronotypes. Do you believe in chronotypes?
Yeah. I'm still learning about it.
Okay.
I'm still learning. I know I'm supposed to be a bear. I tried it like 3 different times, because when I get, like, I love these personality, like, assessments, you know that?
Mm-hmm.
But, like, when I get them, I try them several different times, because I think the results can change
100%.
based on your mindset.
Okay.
So with, like, the Myers-Briggs, you can get 2 different ones.
Right.
Depending on if you feel confident that day.
Yeah.
Or if you feel a little more, like, submissive or, you know, that day. You get 2 different results. So I'll take it, like, 3 or 4 times. And then I'll go with what's the majority. And I'll answer it different ways. I'll answer it in extremes.
Okay.
And then I'll answer it with, like, the maybes.
Yeah.
You know, because they give that option. But I got bear, like, 3 times, so.
Bear's the most common.
Oprah is a bear.
She's a bear? Yes, the most common. I mean, the whole 9 to 5 work schedule is based off the bear chronotype. Yeah. So for those that aren't familiar with chronotypes, lions,
That's you.
yes, wake up early and like are at their best mentally early. Bears are midday, so go to bed at like 10 or 11, wake up at 7 or 8. Then there is wolves, who are evening.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really successful entrepreneurs. I mean, professional athletes, you need to be at your best, you need to kind of transfer yourself over to becoming a wolf, because some of the performances are at night, right?
Oh, really? Interesting.
And then there's dolphins. And then dolphins they kind of are up.
Super early.
No, they kind of go up throughout. They kind of are.
They don't need much sleep, like a Kevin Hart or like a Joe Rogan. would be considered a dolphin.
Yeah, and they are not able to get into like that deep state of rest. Like they're always
wired.
yeah, and I think the history of the chronotype is that we would be in tribes of 150 people around a campfire, and then different people during different times of the day would protect. Bears rise with the sun.
Yeah, but bears like they go based on the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you would like not have window shades. It like irritates me with like window shades sometimes because I don't know what time it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I start to like in my old house, I don't care if people saw me naked or not. I would not have window shades.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because when I feel the sun getting up, I'm getting up.
Yeah. So your circadian rhythm was in perfect sync.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true story.
Yeah, a couple of the things the Gracies did. So Helio and Carlos were the two originators of this clan, and they both lived in their 90s.
Mm.
And they would wake up and they would meditate, I think naked, as the sun came up.
I think it's a great idea.
Hell yeah.
Maybe that's their version of like red light.
Yeah, it's the real thing. It's the real deal Holyfield. Yeah. Why have a red light when you can get that from the sun?
I mean, I'm sorry. My mind is going so many different ways. It's going into like... Can I say it?
You can say it.
Okay. So like the red light therapy is becoming really big now. Like you've been a proponent of this for years.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put it on your balls...
Yes.
Which it's mimicking like the sun's rays.
Yes.
It increases testosterone.
Yes.
So do you think that they like put their balls to the sun? I was like, yo, this is...
The Gracies and their mentality, I would say yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I think they figured that one out.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, they had a couple other cool ones. Another thing that they would do was they would chew each time they would put food in their mouth, they would chew like
100 times.
Yeah, like 100 times. And again, this is like in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. But if I understand correctly, now science says that helps build stem cells now.
Okay.
In your body in doing that. And then also it helps with, of course, not eating too much for those that have weight issues because it takes your body time to process. Mm-hmm. So as you eat, then instead of scarfing something down in 5 minutes, it takes 15, 20 minutes, and you get full before that 15 or 20 minutes is.
What do you think are some supplements that help with weight gain?
I'm a huge proponent of glutamine, which we sell at SuperAthlete in terms of eliminating cravings. So that's great for craving suppression, which, of course, why does weight gain happen, right? You eat stuff that you're not supposed to be eating.
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer in green tea for weight gain, preventing that.
Those come in supplements, too.
Yes. We have in our Ravagin Raspberry ketone, we have green tea in there, and that's as a fat loss.
It sounds tasty.
Yes, it's very tasty. You looked very tasty promoting those yesterday.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I think glutamine is a huge one that many people do not use. And then also, just before you get into supplements, I think taking care of your biology. So habits in terms of sleep and hydration, and then work toward the supplements. And glutamine is huge for that. Mm-hmm. And then also, I'm a big believer in green tea. And then also making sure that your body's getting enough magnesium.
Yeah, magnesium. We're so magnesium deficient.
Yeah, especially athletes. Yes.
Yeah.
Because the body does not produce enough when you sweat and when you train. So if you are working out every day or competing every day or training every day, then you want to be taking some form of magnesium because your body is not going to be able to produce enough of that. Yeah. So we sell that as well. And I'm a huge believer in that being part of like a daily protocol. So those would be the big ones for me. I would say green tea, which we have in our ketone pack, glutamine, which you take after your workout and or 30 minutes before eating.
And I found it's helped me with like my stomach.
Yeah.
Because all women, we have that little pouch.
Mm-hmm.
But when I take the glutamine, it like
Mm-hmm.
eases it.
Yeah. No, 100%. It works. Science backs that up.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Good shit.
Good shit. All right, back to the book. We just did Steel Sharpens Steel. Here's a picture of the baby tossing.
Okay. I'll put that on the screen.
Yeah, we're going to show that. Ooh, we're going to end on that quote. So again, the big theme that I want to come back to in this book that I find very interesting is these two brothers had this vision of what they wanted to create, and they were able to create it in terms of creating this
dynasty.
Yeah. Right? And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really is Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. One of the things Hickson talks about in here is that the reason it's not called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, it's called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is just there was inner fighting amongst the
family.
Amongst the family.
Yeah, that always happens.
Yeah, especially when you got so many boys.
And if the head dies, everybody kind of becomes like scattered and stuff.
Yeah, with that's a very interesting dynamic with this story because the heads didn't die.
Oh, they didn't die.
But they were so set in their ways that
it worked for a while and then it just stopped.
Yeah, it was like Hickson. He as an example, this is his perspective, of course, because this is his book. Mm-hmm. But he started to look at like, hold on, like maybe this is not the best way to do things. Well, at the same time, there's many cases it was the best way. But yeah, with so many. So this idea that they had this vision, and literally Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. The only reason it's called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is because of the infighting amongst Gracies that came to America. Mm. But I think it's just really inspiring to think of like how these two had this vision, and then like think of how much time and effort and work to be able to produce what they produced from like a talent development and a peak performance and a super athlete perspective. I think they changed the entire fighting game.
Yeah, completely.
And I think it's really inspiring. So why don't more people do that? Is it innovation?
I think innovation is a part of that, in particular, like technology. Like there's so much innovation happening like around us. I don't know if people are choosing...
They're choosing comfort.
Yeah, they're choosing comfort.
Rather than mastery.
Mm-hmm.
Or the willingness to be different. Or the willingness to stand
out.
To stand out.
And I think a part of that is biology. When you stand out, you die.
That's a great perspective.
So I think
in truthful perspective.
Yeah. In a way, the same thing designed to like keep us safe and to keep us alive is now like killing us. Mm-hmm. Which I'm sure in the Gracie's perspective, that mindset that they had with like women and all that, there's likely a reason that they had that mindset. Mm-hmm. To be like the man's man. I'm sure it helped them in some way because they wouldn't be doing it if it didn't.
Right.
Benefit them in some way. But then it's not beneficial to them or their kids,
And women had a specific role.
And they had a specific role.
Towards the mission.
Towards that mission.
But it was very limiting.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes, could the mission have still been accomplished if the women had a more empowered role? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah. As long as everybody knows their role. I'm a big believer in roles, though. Mm-hmm. Super believer in, like, roles. And leaning into... And it doesn't matter. In a relationship, with kids, with, employees...
Teammates.
Teammates lean into their strengths. Mm-hmm. And then, you can work on their weaknesses, or they can work on their weaknesses. But for the overall mission, I need everybody to know their strength, and I need them to use that towards this mission. And Because I'm sure those women were highly capable of doing a lot more than what they were given.
Highly capable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of roles of just going back to simplifying things, of like, you have a mission, you have a connection to a greater source, you know what your role is in terms to be played.
It just keeps things easy.
It does keep things easy.
Because I think if you're doing too much, I always say if trying to do everything, you do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
If you just keep it simple, this is what he does, this is what I do, it can be easy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and where he falters, I pick up.
Mm-hmm. And that could be...
And vice versa.
Yeah. And again, that could be in any context.
Yeah. Because if I was another version of you and we worked together, it probably wouldn't work.
Mm-mm. Because
it's too just masculine, driven, crazy energies. And it could, because you're versatile and you're a great listener and all that stuff. But it could be too much.
Going back to this idea of biology, there's a reason people have certain personalities in terms of survival and how they go about together.
Yeah.
What works and what doesn't. All right, so it ends here with his son gets murdered, actually.
Yeah.
Hickson's son gets murdered. And I think what I saw there was like the biggest thing that kind of triggered his son going on this path of, hanging out in dicey situations and putting himself into...
What was the dicey situation?
So the Gracies, like, going back to this idea of throwing the babies and which ones were, what was the word? Game ready?
Game fighters?
Game fighters. So game fighters, if that was a nature, personality, trait, then that's not something that you just turn on while fighting and then,
it's always on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time Hickson and his generation and then his son generation in Brazil, they were considered, like, he uses the word princes, but they were considered royalty in Brazil in terms of how they were treated. And it was understood that, this energy, this personality trait, this recklessness, which can be used to your advantage when fighting, is potentially not going to be used to your advantage when you're not fighting.
Yeah.
But in Brazil, there were so many Gracies. It was so much a part of the culture that it was good. There was it was just, even though a few of them did get into some trouble, it was a huge deal when Hickson came to the United States to help push jiu-jitsu. His dad told him, hey, you should go to the United States and start pushing this. He already had a couple brothers and cousins up here. And his son came with him, and his son, I think, was like 7 or 8. But his son was used to a certain kind of living and status in Brazil where that recklessness and that energy, he loved to train and loved to do jiu-jitsu. He was definitely a game-ready guy. He was completely different when he got to Southern California. So that was like, my takeaway was like the biggest thing that kind of led him into getting into these dicey situations and dicey environment. And he ended up...
And by dicey, you mean drug dealing and...
Yeah, and just...
Gangs
and just pushing the limit on stuff.
Because he was leaking energy.
Yeah, he was leaking energy. And the story's pretty vague at the end, but he ends up getting murdered in New York.
Right.
And...
they put his body in a suitcase.
Is
that what happened?
No.
Or they just put his belongings in a suitcase?
Yeah, with like a Grim Reaper image. And they sent it to Hickson.
Okay.
But it's just going back to this idea of nature and nurture and then environment, and how can that same personality and game-ready Gracie personality trait that created champions, that created Hickson, that created so many other champions, it was a downfall for his son.
Yeah.
Because of the environment that he was kind of exposed to, where it was just too much of a cultural adjustment, it seems like. Because there was no status or nothing. He wasn't rewarded for any of it. It was just punished for who you are.
Yeah.
and this is how I think this is a good way to wrap this up, because it goes back to this idea at the start of the book with Helio and Carlos creating this clan of 21 Gracies, and then all their generations beneath, and then having this mission of this is what you do, and then Hickson, who kind of goes on this journey of physical and spiritual and mental development, and this is how it kind of ends after his son passes away. With kids, you have to accept the fact that you are not in control of their outcomes. You plant the seeds and nurture them as best as you can, but at a certain point, you have to let go. No matter how much knowledge, love, money, or advice you give them, they will fly once their own wings are strong enough. Then they will chart their own course through life. A father must accept his children for who they are, not who he would like them to be. So this is different than what is
completely spoken about in the book.
right.
And what was talked about in the beginning of, the mission. So when does the mission fail you? When you're not allowing them to be individuals. But when does it fail you? When does the mission, when do you have to ease up?
That's a great question. I think it all depends. I think this case is very interesting because, again, the reason his son, Roxon, got into so much trouble was one of the reasons he was so good in martial arts was that same game-ready mentality. It's just, the United States is just a completely different environment than Brazil. Mm-hmm. Especially where he went into Southern California, which is gang culture, right?
Yeah.
If you're brown like that.
Especially in that time.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's about finding different ways and measuring points of is this, and whatever it is, whether it's chess or jiu-jitsu or whatever it is that you're teaching the next generation is, I guess, metrics in terms of at some point, do you keep going or do you pivot and let them be and let them adjust? Would you agree?
Yeah, I think instilling values. I mean, there's one thing to, because I think their mission led them to have this family dynasty and business and where they can live off of that name and off of that skill set. But I think they're missing some values, and I think Hickson learned a lot of those values in terms of how to treat people and women in particular, and learning after the death of his son. Yeah, I think because when you have values, it doesn't matter what environment you are, and that's why connection to God and connection to a higher power is important because you already have those values.
Yeah,
so it doesn't matter where you're being put. So you'll know where to direct your energy because of those values, and I think it was just missed. Sometimes we can miss that.
Mm-hmm. And what was the thing that you said about before 5 years old?
Oh, the what's the chess guy's name?
I think it was Folger or Polger.
Yeah, I'll have to find. I'll have to put it up.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Well, the reason I bring that up there is Bill Gates says.
But he said instill it in him by 5. By 5 is
Okay.
They're,
whatever you want them to do.
Yeah. So
their skill, their craft.
Mm-hmm. You got to lock it in by that age.
Okay.
Which is very early.
It's very early. Mm-hmm. And then I'm guessing because babies are.
Because by 2 you're walking, and it takes 2 years for you to be cognizant of what the hell is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have 2, 3, 4, 5. So you really only have 4 years.
Yeah.
If we're going on that logic, Koger's logic.
Okay. The reason I brought that up is Bill Gates says between the ages of 13 and 18 is the biggest advantage that people have to gain mastery in a subject of how they can, whatever it is that they want to be spending the rest of their life doing.
I feel like you could do that at any age.
Yeah. Well, Gates, of course, that was his thing, is that Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in one of his books, but the reason Bill Gates became Bill Gates is, do you remember? It's one of Gladwell's books where he talks about the importance of like environment. Really, kind of, there is a big,
Huge.
lucky. It's not lucky, but the time that you're born and where you are born plays a huge factor in the results that end up, getting the results. And he talks about how Bill Gates, I don't know, it's just like the late 70s or early 80s, but very few people had access to computers back then. And he was able to get access because he was able to get access in the University of Washington. So his his formative years, which bases him on this theory, was based on 13 to 18 because he already had his 10,000 hours or whatever of reps by the time he got to 18, when he started Microsoft. So that's a counter, I guess, to Folger's theory.
Mm-hmm. So he's saying that if you lock yourself in a certain task, because what they're both saying is the same, just the age is different.
Yes.
It's to be locked in, to like find that thing.
Yes.
Lock in, get your 10,000 hours, and then, I guess you're good.
Not necessarily that you're good, but that you're going to have the advantage.
Yes, because it's more, you even use the term time under tension when we're training. But it's more time spent under a certain type of pressure, and that pressure is that whatever task or whatever talent that you're trying to acquire. So, yeah, it makes sense.
And there's a number of papers in psychology that say, like, if you have a hard time figuring out, like, what you want to do in your life, like when you're 14 years old, what did you want to do? And that, they say, was a key.
I want to be a plastic surgeon.
You want to be a plastic surgeon?
Yeah.
Now is the time.
Now's the time. Did you ever think of what
a great day
you
starts
do?
the night before. You wake up early. You scroll plastic surgeon videos, how to be a plastic surgeon on TikTok for 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Get hydrated. Get your red light therapy. You're ready to start the day.
Okay.
But I think that goes in this idea of formative years. I don't know if I believe the 0 to 5.
Yeah, that's a tough. That's tough.
Yeah. But I like the 13 to 18. And I like the idea of having the single-minded focus. And then I think by 13 to 18, I'm a big believer in exposing, kids to different stuff. So ideally by 13, 14, they've been exposed to a number of different things, and there's one or two things that light them up. So then you kind of can go all in on that. And then I think that's where the advantage
Agreed.
comes in.
Yeah. But I think there is an advantage of getting them even earlier than 13
100%.
to lock in.
Yeah.
Because by 13, you start wanting to, like, explore things. And it's that age. I would even say at 11, you want to start being an individual. But if I lock you in early enough into that thing, that's a money-making skill, that's a talent that you now have, you always have that. And you always have it. So whether you want to explore, spend some time, doing whatever, I've had you at the years where you were dependent on me. That's just my...
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. And I think it's super valuable. But I will say that, the 10,000 hour rule?
I feel like 13-year-olds don't want to listen sometimes.
13-year-olds don't want to listen sometimes. Well, yeah, I think they're trying,
I consider them adults.
Okay.
At that age. At 11, I consider you an adult.
Okay.
In a
Really?
way, like you're becoming an adult.
Okay.
Like you start having adult. You want to be an adult. You want to be an individual. So that's just, yeah. What were you saying about?
That there's this idea of the 10,000 hour rule.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily true in a lot of different. So from a sports perspective, the 10,000 hour rule works at its best when you don't have someone you're competing with across from you. So like golf or shooting, things like that, the 10,000, like the more deliberate practice you put in, then the better you're going to be, the higher likelihood that you're going to become, best in the world at it. But in like competition sports,
There's too many variables.
There's too many variables.
Yeah.
And like what we were talking about, like in terms of the psychological.
Because you're always starting from zero all the time.
Right.
Even when you get into a match, you don't know who's across from you.
Right.
You might study them, but they're studying you. Like, you don't know.
Right.
It's not practice.
Yeah. So he called the subtitle of this book is like a life of flow. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you get that where no matter who you're competing with across from you, you're able to like get into, a flow, relaxed state where you're enjoying yourself and, performing at your best when it matters most, regardless of the situation and the environment. And because when competition-based activities, so whether it's fighting, team sports, things like that, or outside of sports where you're competing against someone else, that's a much bigger factor than reps. Interestingly enough,
What's a much bigger factor?
How you deal
with change.
Yeah, how you deal with change, how you deal with competition, how do you deal with your emotions, how do you deal with energy levels in terms of if I feel like shit, can I still rise up to what I need to rise up at and compete at my best even though I feel like shit physically? How do I motivate myself? How do I set myself up to be able to counter whatever the competition is doing across from me in a way that's the best counter move?
Right.
So, of course, reps play a part in all that, but what this data was showing was like it's just not the 10,000 hours. While it's really important, there's way more variables when you're dealing with
like real life situations and like that's why you're probably so opposed to like punching bags.
Huh?
You know, you get your 10,000 hours of throwing punches through a bag.
Yeah, I just don't find that enjoyable. But it is. I think that's a great analogy because it's completely different because the bag is not.
It's not hitting you back.
Right, and there's a million people who are better at martial arts and striking than me. That's definitely not my area of expertise. Who would say, "Well, you learn technique."
Of course.
By doing that.
But that's what I'm getting at. Is like that 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Is time of getting better at striking, at kicking, and all that stuff. It doesn't negate the fact that it's important and it's useful. But then there's another side to that.
Right. So this idea of developing super athletes and becoming a super athlete, it's like knowing yourself and knowing like what's the protocol that works for you in terms of technique and time spent and this level
and then actual application, like real life application.
And I think the Thais figured this out with initially is because their whole thing was they do light sparring. That's their huge thing more than kicking I don't know how much they do with the bags and stuff like that. But in terms of Muay Thai and like striking, like their whole thing was doing sparring with each other, but doing it very light, right? But so then you can see that if I do this, my opponent across from me is going to do that. So action and reaction. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
So, well, it's a fantastic story.
That is an awesome story. What is the name of this book?
The name of the book is Breathe, A Life in Flow, and it's by Hickson himself along with a professional writer. And Hickson was really kind of turned into the one-of-ones out of all these Gracies. But I just thought the story of how it originated, I thought was worth telling. Because I just think it's really interesting how...
Yeah. Can I sound off by asking, how do you find your flow state or keeping your life in flow?
How do I keep my life in flow?
Yeah.
I think my number one answer to that is to just do stuff. No, that's for me.
Okay.
For me.
Yes.
Because like you don't want to
just be doing shit.
That's something we talk about, right? Like you don't want to be like fucking running in a circle, and you don't want to be doing shit for the sake of doing shit.
Yeah.
But I think for me personally, where I get into non-flow is where I start overthinking stuff. So I think like a theme from this episode that I hope people take away from was by being able, even if you're religious or not, you would say go to church.
Go to church.
But if you're religious or not, whether you want to be connected with something bigger,
than you. Yeah.
right? Because that provides a set of values that you can kind of fall back on.
Yeah.
So then you don't have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you want to have some kind of mission that you want to connect to, like, this is what I do. This is who I am. This is what I do. And then having those things creates an environment where you can do stuff based on that and then get into, that gets me into flow,
Yeah.
I think. So don't do shit for the sake of doing shit, but use your brain. So get a great night of rest. And before going on TikTok, take a few minutes in the morning to figure out, okay, he has a line in here of like, what inspires me? What empowers me?
Mm-hmm.
Take a second to actually use your brain, figure that out, and then spend some time actually doing activities that work toward that.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets into flow for me.
Oh, that's fire. Go you. That is inspiring.
Yeah. What gets you into flow?
I would say the mission for sure.
Mm-hmm.
To know, okay, this is where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
This is the destination I want to be at. And then my stepdad uses the term, it only matters how you're going to begin
Mm-hmm.
and then where you want to end.
Mm.
Everything else in between is what's going to get you to the end,
Mhm.
right? So however you decide to get there,
Mm-hmm.
just make sure it's moral, but,
Mm-hmm.
get there.
Mm-hmm.
Do shit
Mm-hmm.
to get to that destination.
Mhm.
And it matters how you start.
Mm-hmm.
To start it, know how you want to finish, and then everything in between is just action.
Yeah.
That's how I would get into flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Works for me.
Yeah. I think that's great because you have a vision of where you want to go,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're gonna make sure that the first step you take is in the right direction.
Yeah, and that first step is planning. It's your skeleton,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's like writing or a business plan or a project. Your start is mapping that out, and starting with that path or that map that you just created,
Mm-hmm.
and then on the mission.
Mm. Okay, let's wrap up there.
Mm-hmm.
Highly recommend that you check out the book. We're going to have some very exciting, inspiring guests coming up on the Super Athlete Radio Show podcast. So make sure that you are downloading every episode, and please comment with feedback on what you would like to hear more. Say bye.
Bye.